Welcome from my living room to yours as we gather together and we have a chance to look into God's Word today. We used to have a dog, and this dog, he was mostly German Shepherd. His mother was some kind of a husky breed, a quiche hound, I believe it was. But he was a big dog, well over 100 pounds, and for 15 years, we never locked the back door of our house. He was back there, and people just wouldn't go back past him, you know. Even the friend that I had, that he loved the dog, but he just was a little leery if we weren't home of him walking around the back there. But this dog, he was never allowed here in our living room. He was out the back and he was outside most of the time, and he was a big dog, like I say. But when it came to thunderstorms, he was scared. All right, and I remember one night in the middle of the night, the dog, there was a storm outside. I didn't wake up with the storm, but the dog walked through the kitchen, through the living room, down the hall, into the bedroom, and he is licking my face, knowing he's not allowed in that end of the house at all, but he was so scared of the storm. One Wednesday night, we went to prayer meeting, and it was nice outside when we left, and so we left the dog outside, and he was fine out there, but during prayer meeting, there was a bad storm that came, thunder and lightning and everything else, and when we got back, he had actually tore our screen door, one of those doors where you have a window, and then a metal pane on the bottom, and he tore the metal pane off of the door, cut himself all up. There was blood all over the place, but he just went berserk if there was a storm. He just didn't understand the thunder, and it scared him. You know, do you ever question things that are happening to you? You know, maybe you get a scare from a doctor's diagnosis, or maybe it's because, you know, you think, well, I don't deserve this. Like, why is this happening to me? You know, and it really boils all down to that one question of why. What is the purpose in all of this? You know, well, we're gonna take a look and see if we can tackle that question, at least in part today, as we look into God's Word and as we carry on through the book of 2 Kings. And we're going to look at two of Elisha's miracles this morning or this afternoon, whenever you get a chance to watch this video, that are eerily similar to two miracles that Elijah did. And remember, Elisha was Elisha's servant that had helped him, and he was the guy there that did all the stuff, that all the running around and everything like that before God made him the prophet that he was. I want you to take your Bibles and turn with me to 2 Kings chapter 4. Okay, 2 Kings chapter 4. We see there in verse 1, it says, "Now there cried a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets unto Elisha, saying, Thy servant my husband is dead, and thou knowest that thy servant did fear the Lord, and the creditor is come to take unto him my two sons to be bondmen." So notice the relationship here with Elisha, again with the sons of the prophets. And he knew this man, as his wife said. She said, "Thy servant, my husband, is dead, and thou knowest that thy servant did fear the Lord." So Elisha had a personal relationship with this man before he died and left his wife and his two sons. And clearly he knew him. He had probably taught him many things about God and his relationship with God as he was in one of the sons of the prophets. And as we learned a couple of weeks back, that they had like a prophet school, all right? And Elisha, whether he overlooked the whole school or not, he was there at least in part as one of the people that would instruct these young men in the ways of the Lord. All right, and here we see here that this man had amassed some kind of a debt, and he died, and his wife had no way to pay the creditors, and she didn't have a job of her own. That's just the society that they were in back then. And you know, I taught on biblical finances 7 years ago. Maybe I should dig those notes out and go through that again and teach that again another time. But you know, the first thing that like she said, she comes to Elisha and she says, "What am I going to do? They want to take my two sons to be servants, to be slaves," and that was a common practice then. If someone could not pay their bills, that they could be They could be bought. They could be bought and to have to serve until that debt was paid, or the rest of their lives, whichever came first. All right. And Elisha says unto her, he says, what have you got? All right. Look at verse 2. It says, and Elisha said unto her, what shall I do for thee? Tell me, what hast thou in the house? What do you have? What do you have? Sometimes if we want to see God's blessings, we have to be willing to part with something, and what have I got that I can give to God for him to use? Now, quite honestly, God doesn't need anything we have. He doesn't need your money. He doesn't need anything, but he wants your devotion. He wants your trust. He wants your love. That's what God wants. He's given that to us, and that's what he would like in return. But he asked this woman, he says, what do you have? And she says, all I've got in my house is this pot of oil. And Elisha says to her, he says, I want you to go out to your neighbors and to everybody you can find and borrow vessels, borrow pots, borrow jars, borrow vases, however you want to say it, whatever. Borrow as many as you can. He says, borrow not a few. All right? Go and get as many vessels as you can. He says, and then when you get the vessels, I want you to go into your house and I want you to close the door so no one else is going to be there. No one else is going to see this miracle, okay, or see what's going to happen. I don't think he didn't use the word miracle, but he said no one else is going to see this. I want you to go into the house, just you and your two sons. I want you to shut the door, and then you're going to pour the oil from the pot into these other containers and fill them up. Now it's interesting when he says about shutting the door. So it's not a spectacle that's going to happen, and sometimes in some of the miracles that God did through his men that he had on as prophets and so forth, there was lots of people there. We know when he had the thing with Elijah on Mount Carmel and the 450 prophets of Baal plus the Israelites were there. There was probably thousands of people that got to see this great miracle of when the fire came down and consumed the altar. We know there was a couple of million people probably who saw that when God opened up the Red Sea, okay, and when Jesus fed the 5,000, there was 5,000 men, and then there was women, and then there was children. So sometimes there was many, but sometimes in some of God's miracles there was only just a few, and in this case, only 3. Not even Elisha was there to see it happen. It was just the wife, the widow, and just her 2 sons, her 2 young sons, all right? And so she goes in and she closes the door and they have the vessels that are there and she starts pouring the oil, okay? And pouring the oil in it, and it's similar to the one where Elijah, okay, when he had the widow there at Zarephath where he said that your barrel of meal and the cruse of oil will not fail until it rains, okay? So she came and she poured for over a year. She used some of that oil. But this lady used all this, and her whole miracle only lasted a day, but it just kept coming. Just kept coming. And she's pouring this stuff into a vessel, and it's full. And how did all that come out of this thing? I don't know. And she pours in, and she goes along, and she's going along, and then finally she's asking her sons, bring me another vessel, and then bring me. What do you mean there's no more vessels? There isn't any more. All right? That's all that there was. And if we look in verse 6, I want to show you something here. And it says, and it came to pass, when the vessels were full, that she said unto her son, bring me yet a vessel. And he said unto her, there is not a vessel more, and the oil stayed. That was the end of this part of the miracle. It wasn't like she could see that these jars were all full and she could say, well, run outside and go get some more of these, go get some more vessels for us, go get some more pots, go find some more stuff, because this is cool how this is working. No, it was all done. Once she closed that door, that was the limit that she was going to have. But she filled all these vessels, and she goes to Elisha and she says, okay, Elisha, did what you said. This is what happened. I imagine that she was pretty excited, like she got to see this thing firsthand. And there's Elisha, calm, cool, and collected, and he says, sell what you have and pay your debt. First thing, pay your debt. And then you and your sons live off of the rest. Okay? And it's neat that's the instructions that he gave to her, and the miracle that she saw, and she was able to live off the rest. She couldn't go out and make more and become wealthy and rich and so forth, but there was enough, okay? And she had enough, all right? Elisha, his hometown was a place called Abel Meholah, all right? But that's where he was from, where his parents lived, his family lived, all right? Whether his parents were still alive this time, I'm not sure, but that is where he was from. And he spent most of his time in Carmel, all right? And in between, whether he was traveling from Carmel to Abel Meholah back home, or whether he was going some other places, halfway between Abel Meholah and Carmel, where he lived, pretty much the halfway mark, was a place called Shunem. And he frequently went through here on his travels. And one time as he was going through here on his travels, look at verse number 8, all right? Still there in 2 Kings chapter 4. And it fell on a day that Elisha passed through Shunem, where was a great woman, and she constrained him to eat bread. And so it was that as oft as he passed by, he turned in thither to eat bread. And he went by there a lot. If you like a look at the very last part of verse 9, it says, which passes by us continually. And she constrained him to come and to stay in their house with her and her husband, okay? Completely upright situation here, all right? But it tells us here in verse number 8, it says that she was a great woman. And this great woman, she was great in character, and I think also it means that her family was great in that it was a family with some means, okay? They owned some property, they owned a decent-sized house, and they had people that worked for them, and a large area where they farmed and so forth. And this woman, when it says that she constrained him, it almost seems like she had to ask him over and over again to come. Please come on and stay here, because she knew that this was a man of God. And Elisha, being the humble man that he was, he's not looking to go and stay with somebody wealthy and benefit from them, okay? But she constrained him to come, and Elisha comes and he stays there with them, all right? And it seems like it happened frequently that as he went there, so it was, look at the end of verse 8, it says, and so it was that as oft as he passed by, he turned in thither to eat bread. And one day she says to her husband, she says, this is a great godly man. She says, why don't we build him a granny suite? Okay, that's not the word she used, but she built him a room, all right? And it's just a simple room. There'll be a bed there. There'll be a table there. There'll be a candlestick there for him and a little table, all right? And she said, let's build this here, all right? And it is basically probably the first prophet's chamber that ever happened. And I know of a lot of churches that put these in, and there are some people, as following the example of the Shunammite woman here, who have put up prophets' chambers. I had the opportunity to stay in one of these on one of my trips, one of my missions trips, and I was heading out east, and I was going through Quebec, and this one church had a prophet's chamber, and I was going there to do some estimates on some stuff on what we were going to do some work there, and I met with the pastor, and I said, I'm going to be getting there about 4 o'clock in the morning. Is there any way you can leave a key outside and I can lay down and get a bit of a nap, because I will have left church right after church the night before, and drove for about 8 hours to get to where this man was, and he did, and it was a neat thing. You know, and I wonder if we miss out on a lot of things when, you know, with having the hotels and motels that we have now, and we don't have that, you know, where people aren't as apt to have a missionary, say, come and stay with them in their home. You know, I'm wondering how much we miss there. You know, God says that in Romans, and also in 1 Timothy, he talks about the phrase given to hospitality. And 1 Timothy, it's talking about given to hospitality as a character quality of a pastor. But when it talks in the book of Romans, when it says given to hospitality, it's not limited to just pastors, not limited to just deacons. It's limited to Christians, ones that are following God, you know, and he says we should be rather given to hospitality and want that fellowship with others and to help one another out. But at any rate, moving on here, one day while Elisha was here and staying there, he turns to his servant. that he has now, like just as Elisha was Elijah's servant, he turns to his servant Gehazi rather, and he says to Gehazi, he says, listen, he says, call this woman in here, and I'm going to see if there's something that we can do for her. She's done so much for us. And look there in verse number 13, and he said unto him, talking to Gehazi, say now unto her, behold, thou hast been careful for us with all this care. What is to be done for thee? Wouldest thou be spoken for to the king or to the captain of the host? And she answered, I dwell among mine own people. All right. You know, she's saying this great woman. All right. We're going to see how great she is as we move on this morning. But this great woman, what she's saying here by saying this, I dwell among mine own people. She's not looking for something of social status. She's not looking to make a name to be with the king, all right, or to have some great privilege or anything like that. She just says, no, I am quite content right where I am. She is of great character. In the book of Hebrews, in chapter 13 and verse 5, the author, which I believe is Paul, says, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have, for he has said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Be content with such things as you have. That was this woman. She wasn't looking for more. She was blessed, and she was happy with what she had, all right? And she says, no, I don't need anything. I'm just happy the way I am, and we're glad to have you here. And she leaves, and Elisha says to Gehazi, he says, what are we going to do for this woman? And it's funny that Gehazi, he comes up with a suggestion. He says, she's, getting up there a bit. Well, not so much that he says about her, but he says, you know what? Her husband is really old. He's old, and they don't have any children. Look at verse 14. It says, and he said, what then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, verily she hath no child, and her husband is old. It's like he's coming up with a suggestion. Well, why don't we somehow, ask God to give her a child? All right, and we've seen this before where old couples, where God in his word has blessed, and old couples had children at old age. Remember Abraham and Sarah? Abraham was 99 years old. Sarah was 90 years old, and they had a child. And Manoah, remember Manoah and his wife, they had Samson. Zacharias and Elizabeth, they had John the Baptist, and they were old and past the time where they would normally have children, but God opened up the opportunity there and opened up her womb, and they were able to have children. And so he brings her back in, and he tells her, that she's going to have a child this time next year. And she doesn't believe it at first, no. And he says no. And they come back, and the next year she had a little boy. All right. And we see that some time passes. Maybe it's 4 years, 5 years. It's hard to say, but the boy was old enough to run out into the field and talk to his father. And he goes out into the field, and he says, "Father, my head." All right, and he's complaining about some kind of pain in his head. And his father says to one of the workers that he has there, he says, "Pick up the lad and pick up the boy and take him to his mother." So he's old enough that he can talk and he can run around, and he's young enough that he can come back. And it says that he laid on his mother's lap and laid there until noon. And at noon he died. So I'm guessing he's probably like 4, 5, I don't know, something along that size, big enough and old enough to run, but small enough that he can stay on his mother's lap. But it's interesting of what she does. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't tell anyone that her son has just died, but she takes him and she takes him upstairs to the room that they had built for Elisha to stay in, and she puts him on Elisha's bed. It's so similar to Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 17 where the widow's son dies, and Elijah takes her boy and he puts him on his bed. I really believe that Elisha had told some of these accounts to this woman, and somehow she put these pieces together, and she took the boy, and because of what Elisha had probably told her of what had happened before, and she took the boy up the stairs and laid him on Elisha's bed. Now, we see that we looked at in 1 Kings chapter 17, this widow, when her son died, she basically blamed God and Elijah for what had happened. Now, this boy was already there when Elijah came into the story, but she says, what have you done? Bring my sin to remembrance for me. And she's blaming, but not this great woman from Shunem. All right? She is truly a great woman. Look at verse number 8. All right? I'm sorry. It's not verse number 8. Verse number 8 tells us that she was a great woman. All right? But what she does is she asks her husband if she can leave and go to see Elisha. And her husband must have just thought that, well, the boy's doing better and he's probably just resting or whatever. I mean, it doesn't say what happens, but he says, it's not the new moon, it's not the Sabbath. There's not a time for a sacrifice, which shows us something else. That this woman was probably frequently goes to all of these sacrifices to worship God there, because this is the first thing that comes to the Father's mind. He says, well, it's not a new moon or Sabbath. Why do you want to go see Elisha? All right. And she just says, well, take a look at verse 23. And he said, wherefore wilt thou go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, it shall be well. It shall be well. What do you mean it shall be well? Her son, who they've waited for forever, has just died. And she comes to her husband and she said, it shall be well. And he says, well, okay, just how much faith does this great woman have? How much faith does she have? And she asked to have someone that could go with her, and a young man goes with her. And then she says to this young man those words that every husband has longed for his wife to say to him. Drive as fast as you possibly can and don't slow down unless I say something. All right? Okay. That's what she says to this man. All right? Now, the man that's driving, and she says, just ride and don't worry about me back here unless I say something. And she comes to Carmel. And as she's coming to Carmel, Elisha looks out and he recognizes, in the dust, as if these guys are coming along as fast as they can come, and he recognizes that it's the Shunammite. And he says to Gehazi, he says, go and see what's up with, God hasn't shown me what's going on here. So go and ask this woman what it is and why she's coming. See if it's okay with her husband, if it's okay with her, if it's okay with the boy. And so Gehazi runs out and he meets them part way there. And he asks these questions, and I want you to see her response here again. Verse number 26. He says, run now, I pray thee, talking to Gehazi, to meet her, and say unto her, is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. Just like that song we love to sing. It is well. How can it be well? Her husband doesn't know, and her son has just died. And she says to Gehazi, it is well. They come in to see Elisha. And this woman with this great faith, this godly woman, when she saw Elisha, okay, and he is the first one that she's going to tell that her son died. Well, her emotions take over here. She falls down at his feet, and Gehazi is going to grab her and pull her away. That's improper. And Elisha says, no, wait, there's something that's really troubling her here. And she just says to him, all right, she says, verse 28, and she said, did I desire a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? And she's not blaming Elisha. She's not blaming God, but she said, why give me this boy if he's going to be taken away? Basically, is what she's saying here. And this next little part, I don't really understand why Elisha did what he did. And maybe you've got some thoughts on it or some speculations on it, and I'd encourage you to text me, write me, email me, call me, whatever, and just share why you think he did what he did. But he gives Gehazi his rod, and he says, I want you to take this. If anybody says anything to you, don't talk to them. If they say, where are you going? Don't say a word to them. If they say good day, you don't say good day to them. Whatever. You don't say a word to them. All right? You go, You rush there, get as fast as you can, take my rod, put it on the child. I don't know why he did that. He comes back. He says, the child did not awake. All right, which kind of shows that they're thinking, at least Gehazi is thinking, well, he's just asleep. Well, nothing happened. All right, and but the child is dead. I'm going to show you this. Look, verse number 32. The mother rides back. First off, the mother says, I'm not going to look at verse 30. It says, and the mother of the child said, as the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And he arose and he followed her, and the two of them were together. But in verse 32, it says, and when Elisha was come into the house, behold, the child was dead and laid upon his bed. All right, the child is dead. And Elisha goes in there, and he shuts the door. Gehazi's not there. Mom's not there. The other servant that came with them and brought them back, he's not there. It's just Elisha and the little boy. The little boy's laying on his bed there. All right. Elisha does something maybe the very first thing that he did was he prayed, which is the first thing that we should do whenever we come into any kind of situation. It should always be our first response is to pray as well. And Elisha does the same thing that Elijah did. And Elijah laid on top of that boy there, of the widow of Zarephath's boy. And Elisha tells us here, it goes into some great detail here. It says that he goes on there and he says his hands were on his hands and his face was on his face and his eyes were there and his mouth was to his mouth and so forth. And he stayed there and actually warmed the body up. But nothing happened. And he gets out of there and he closes the door and he comes downstairs into the other part of the house and he's walking back and forth and pacing. And I'm sure that while he's doing this, no doubt he is praying and asking what happened. Now Elijah, when he did it, he had to do it 3 times. But Elisha goes up the second time, all right? And as he does this, the second time, it says the child, look at verse 35. It says, and he returned and walked in the house to and fro, and went up and stretched himself upon him, and the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi and said, call this Shunammite. So he called her, and when she came in unto him, he said, take up thy son. And she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground and took up her son and went out. And the boy was back alive and back fun. Everything was fine. But why? Why put this woman, this great woman of faith, why put her through this? And I mean, she showed that she had great faith. Was it just a test? I don't believe so, okay? It seems that she had almost unshakable faith. When she finally started to spill it out, the emotions poured out there. Her son had died, and nobody can blame her for that, all right? But why did she have to go through this? Why do bad things happen to you and to me? Why is that? Some time passes, all right? Some time passes, and it doesn't specify how long it is, all right? But in 2 Kings in chapter 8, in verse 1, it says, then spake Elisha unto the woman, this is in 2 Kings chapter 8, whose son he had restored to life, saying, arise and go thou and thine household, and sojourn wheresoever thou canst sojourn, for the Lord hath called for a famine, and it shall also come upon the land 7 years. Now clearly this famine that was going to come was a judgment on Israel, because the famine was only in Israel. If they went to any of these neighboring countries, they had water, they had food there, but Israel did not. And what he was doing, Elisha was giving this woman and her family a head start. Now there is no mention after this of the woman's husband. It's very, very possible, as we saw earlier, that as time had passed here, that he had died because he was old. All right, now possibly not, but it doesn't mention him ever again. But just kind of keep that in mind. And he tells her that the famine is going to be there, and the famine is going to be for 7 years. She gets a head start on everybody else. The famine hasn't even started yet, so she gets to go on a head start. And find some other place to live before there's a big rush of other people leaving Israel to find some place where they can live, all right? And she's gone for 7 years, all right? When the famine is over, she starts to come back, okay? And as she comes back, she finds that somebody else has moved into her house and claimed all her property, and now she has nothing, all right? What is she going to do? It's a woman, probably without her husband, but she's got her young son, who maybe at this point might be 14, 15 years old. I don't know, okay? But it's clearly after the boy was probably 4 or 5 years old when he died and came back to life, and then some time passing in between there, and then the 7 years of the famine. So he's got to be more than 12, but he's probably not that terribly old, all right? And as we'll see in just a minute, but what she's going to do is she's going to go and talk to the king. That's one of those things that kings did back then. They would, when there's disputes and so forth, they would try to resolve these disputes. But in the meantime, this is pretty cool. The king, who is Jehoram, evil King Jehoram, decides to call in Gehazi, who is no longer Elisha's servant. And even though Gehazi at this time, I believe, he's got leprosy, all right? This king would rather talk to a leper than he would talk to Elisha, because the reason he called for Gehazi to come was he wanted to find out some things about Elisha. But he didn't want to talk to Elisha. That would be too convicting. God speaking through Elisha, he would have told him what kind of sins he was doing. But you know what? He wanted to find out. But at the same time, he didn't want to have any conviction about this. So as he's talking, as Gehazi is talking about Elisha, he's telling of the miracles that Elisha had done. And as he's talking about one of these great miracles, he says, and there was a boy that died and he raised him to life. Just as he finishes telling that story, that account that had happened, in comes this lady to ask about her land. And Gehazi turns around and says, that's her. And that's the boy that he raised to life. That's them right there. And the king, he's compelled by this whole thing. He's been listening to these miracles that Elisha has done. And, he's kind of excited about this. And he orders that an officer there, a soldier, he said, you take this woman back. She gets her house back. And all the crops, all the profits that this place has made for the last 7 years that she's been there, you get back for her, okay? You get back for her. Verse number 5, 2 Kings chapter 8. And it came to pass, as he was telling the king how he had restored the dead body to life, that behold, the woman whose son had been restored to life cried to the king for her house and for her land. And Gehazi said, my lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son whom Elisha restored. All right? I'm going to tell you something. God knew this woman's need, and he provided for it probably 10 years before it had happened. Before she even knew her need, God had provided for that. He had already taken care of this need by letting her son die, bringing him back to life. The need that was going to happen where she's going to be alone and she's going to have nothing and come back and have nothing, she's going to get it all back because God took care of her beforehand. Tells us in Isaiah chapter 55 and verse 9, it says, for as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. We don't know God's plans. We don't know how God's providence will work, all right? And sometimes we may never know. Sometimes we may never know what God's purposes are. I heard of a lady who prayed for her son for over 40 years that he would get saved. And he never got saved. And she died. Over 40 years she prayed for her son. Right after the funeral, her son got saved. God answered her prayer. She never got to see it. She was dead by the time it happened. Well, she was seeing it from heaven. But She never got to see it happen right on earth, but we don't understand God's timing. God's not limited to time like we are. And whatever may happen, we may not understand it, but God's providence is real. And God's grace to us is real. And this woman had to go through this heartache of losing her son, even though she was obviously a great woman of faith, a great godly woman. She says to her husband, she says to Gehazi, it is well. She just lost her son. It is well. Held back the tears. It is well. Because she trusted God. I'm going to read this next little passage to you here. It says it happened in the early 1800s, and it was during Napoleon's quest to conquer the world. It says, the citizens of Feldkirch, Austria, didn't know what to do. Napoleon's massive army was preparing to attack. Soldiers had been spotted on the heights above their little town, which was situated on the Austrian border. A council of citizens was hastily summoned to decide whether they should try to defend themselves or display a white flag of surrender. It happened to be Easter Sunday, and the people had gathered in the local church. The pastor rose and said, friends, we have been counting on our own strength, and apparently that has failed. As this is the day of our Lord's resurrection, let us just ring the bells, have our services as usual, and leave the matter in his hands, God's hands. We know only our weaknesses and not the power of God to defend us. The council accepted his plan, and the church bells rang. The enemy heard the sudden peal, concluded that the Austrian army had arrived during the night to defend the town, and before the service ended, the enemy broke camp and left. We don't know what God is doing. We just need to trust his providences. I don't know whatever trial you may be going through, but God knows all about it. He knows it from the beginning to the end. He knew it was going to happen before it happened, and he knows what's going to happen in the end, and God has his purposes. That's what God's providence is all about. We need to be like that Shunammite woman. When she responded to her husband, and she responded to Gehazi with, it is well. It is well. It's like that song we sing, little chorus, why worry? Just think of those first few words. Why worry when you can pray? We don't need to worry. We just need to trust God, because it is truly well. It is well to be in God's hand. In God's hand. We can trust him. We serve an awesome God.